Welcome to the LC3 Family Talk podcast, where we take a deeper look at everything from recent sermons to current events, all through a biblical lens. You'll love the guests and stories you'll hear on LC3 Family Talk, where our goal is connection, community, and relationship with God and with one another. And now, here's your host and one of our pastors, David Pritchard.
So we are here on LC3 Family Talk, and I'm looking forward to today's conversation. We're going to be talking a little bit about mental health and all that means, especially in this cultural moment, but certainly what it means to our LC3 family. And I think specifically as we think about parenting, we're going to try to take a look at what that means. Thankfully, you don't have to listen to me the whole time. We have a couple of guests today. Pastor Reese is joining us, but also Dr. Jen Persis. I think most of us at LC3 know her just as Jen, our friend, but
yes, thank you.
She is also a brilliant doctor, and we'll get into more of credentials and stuff as we continue to have this conversation. But thanks you guys for being here. Really glad that you are here. Why don't you tell the folks a little bit about you and how you find yourself here at LC3?
Sweet. My name is Reese, like David said. I serve as the next gen pastor here at Lake City and have since 2020, married to my wife, Allison. We have two kiddos, Wesley and Elsie, who are 3 and a year and a half. We are from the Pacific Northwest, spent time in a couple of different states until we came back up here in 2020 and just absolutely love this church and so grateful to be here.
Mm-hmm.
And how about you?
Yes, Jen Persis. I am originally from Southern California. I went to medical school in Chicago where I met my husband, who was also in med school. And then we did residency out in Connecticut, where I trained as a general psychiatrist and then did a fellowship in child and adolescent psychiatry. Then after that, we went back to Ohio, where my husband's from, and ultimately landed here in Washington State. So happy to be back on the West Coast. And we've been here since 2011 and found Lake City pretty shortly after we moved here. I went to college with Jeremy Everts. Don't hold that against me. We were actually very good friends, and that was how we ended up finding Lake City and have been here ever since. And it is my favorite church home.
Mm-hmm.
So.
That's awesome. Again, I'm so glad you're here. Of course, my name is David Pritchard, and I get to serve as the pastor over family ministries, but also congregational care. So this sort of intersects both of those things. I often get to play host on LC3 Family Talk, and so I'm really, really grateful again that you guys have joined us. We are at the start of a year, a new year. How's the new year starting out? We're 3 weeks into this. Do you guys make any resolutions? Have you already broken any resolutions? How's the year starting out?
Jen, I don't know about you, but like for me, making goals are really, really hard because I'm a perfectionist. And so putting anything on paper is like, if I don't do this, like I'm a terrible human being. But one thing that Alice and I are trying to do, which is vague, but I'll get to the more detailed thing of it, is act out the boldness that has been given to us by Christ. And so some of that is just like doing some things that are uncomfortable because we know we should. And now that we have 2 little kids, we don't have as much sleep as we used to.
So much opportunity to be uncomfortable as a parent.
Yes. What that does, though, is we've been disciplined people, and once we've started having kids, it's like our schedules are completely thrown off, and our disciplines kind of go out the window, and so we're like, we need to get more disciplines back. We need to start doing hard things. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is do either like cold showers or like cold plunges. And so literally just last night, I got a cold tub and put it outside.
Oh my!
And that's how I started my morning this morning.
That's why you're glowing. That's why you're
it's
so
the skin,
vibrant.
Yes, as you can see.
Cold plunge start to the day.
So I don't have any like we're going to do it this many times a week or whatever, but trying to do something uncomfortable to re-up some habits and some disciplines.
Great.
In our
Well,
lives.
I'm not ready to join you in that. All right.
I didn't even set any resolutions this year. I do like having goals. I share your affliction of perfectionism. But I think the main reason why we didn't set any, or why I didn't set any goals or resolutions is because we got a Christmas puppy. And similar to children, it is bringing back echoes of infancy and like the new babies in the house. It is easier to do with a canine infant than a human infant, having done that with my 3 human infants who are not infants anymore. So I actually have entered this year with lots of open-handedness and grace, which I think that's just where the Lord has had me for the last year. It's been a lot of breaking down some of the desire to be really planned and in control and following things to a T. He's been working on breaking down the perfectionism for a long time. Apparently, you can talk about things from the podium as a speaker and be telling other people, hey guys, like this is what we, and this is true, but not actually know it for yourself. And the Lord has a way of being like, hey, guess what? Remember that talk you gave?
I can't relate at all.
No, I'm sure. Well, it's coming. It's coming. I guess maybe I intentionally went into the year with a lot of open-handedness.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I do not suffer from your U2's perfectionism, which is probably why I'm not the amazing people that you guys are. But we have talked about some goals. We're trying to be very consistent with our Bible reading. I think the do-hard part about it for me is going to be around the area of just being a little more consistent with workouts. That's the thing that gets pushed out of the way for me the quickest. All of a sudden I can look back 3 weeks later and go, man, I haven't done anything except sit at a desk, for the last 3 weeks. So that's mine for this year.
Yeah.
Do your workout and then go do your cold plunge.
Yeah, just come on over. Yeah, you can do it.
Oh, gosh. Okay, well, we're here to talk about mental health. I should preface by saying we're not coming at this as, hey, we're the experts and we're going to tell you everything you need to know, but it is a conversation that's out there. We hear about it all the time, and oftentimes when we speak of it or we hear about it, I don't know that we're all thinking the same thing when the words come out. And so it might be good to start a little bit with that, and then I'll just start with this, because I think one of the things that has been helpful for us as we've been doing some of our mini courses for parenting is kind of giving a gospel framework. We try to look at things through the lens of the gospel, creation, fall, redemption, restoration, which I think that fits for so many conversations that we have, especially those hard ones. And certainly when it comes to mental health, that's true as well. God created us with a design and a plan, but then we have the fall, and that certainly throws a wrench into the mix. And so then the question becomes, what then do we do? Like, how do we redeem that? And then, of course, what do we do in terms of, like, from here on out, how do we restore that? And so, we're going to have that threaded through this conversation as we go along. But I think it would be good to start with, what do we even mean when we talk about mental health? What is that? We'll start with, the doctor purses.
You said we're not experts here, but come on.
Well, one of us is. One of us is.
Yeah.
Well, I tend to take a pretty clinical definition of mental health. It's been in the news a lot in the last few years, actually, now, talking about a crisis in mental health. And the crisis is not that everybody is so mentally healthy that we're just doing great, right? So we talk about mental health, but often what we're talking about is people having problems or insufficient mental health, which for me, from a clinical perspective, is often emotional or behavioral disorders, right? So things like anxiety, depression. There are lots of other things that can fall under the mental health umbrella, like psychotic disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder,
those aren't usually the ones you talk about.
Right.
Often.
When we're talking about the crisis, especially because I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist and a mom of 3, when we're talking especially about kids or youth and mental health, the two biggies are depression and anxiety. And I feel like those are the ones that we have really seen the rates of those skyrocket in the last, it's been a little over 10 years now that my dad's a math teacher, right? So I'm always thinking in graphs, and it's becoming exponential. And so the trajectory of especially depression and anxiety is way outpacing other disorders.
Well, I love how you started by saying you're going to take a clinical approach to answering that. But Reese, I'll throw it to you. So as the next gen pastor and youth pastor, walking alongside students, but also walking alongside parents of those students, when you hear mental health, what does that mean to you as you think about the people that you're ministering to?
Yeah, well, and I think what Jen said from a clinical perspective, I'm coming at it from more of a pastoral perspective, thinking about young people, and really quickly, as soon as I became a youth pastor, those two biggies, like you call them, anxiety and depression. Oftentimes when I'm talking with students and I have a conversation about, hey, how's your relationship with the Lord going? Not always, but pretty close. There will be something to my mental health. Either the Lord is really helping my anxiety or my depression, or my anxiety and depression are worsening. And so I think our young people are thinking in terms of just how they're doing as individuals.
Yeah.
They're looking at mental health almost as a primary, whereas I don't know 20, 30 years ago if people would refer to their mental health when they would say, this is how I'm doing right now.
Right.
And they would go to anxiety or depression almost right off the bat.
Yeah, it's almost like it's become synonymous with coping, right? Like really what it is we have an epidemic of people struggling coping with life, with
How do
hard
we cope
things.
with whatever it is?
And the way that often manifests is I'm not coping well, and the way I know I'm not coping well is because I'm having these symptoms of depression, or I'm feeling wicked anxious, and and so that's how people often know that they're not coping well. And I think our kids nowadays are really attuned to that language. That being said, I think some of our clinical language has been co-opted and used in ways that it was never designed to be used, because not only do kids all have a crisis in mental health now, and my mental health is tanking, but they're also all traumatized, and they're all and some of these things that really bother me.
Which were words that meant a specific thing clinically to you and your profession now.
And I think they're doing themselves a disservice if we see everything as trauma. We have now set up a situation for ourselves where we can't learn to cope, right? Because trauma gives me a pass. If I have experienced this trauma, then in some ways, I don't have to cope. Like, of course I'm feeling this way, because instead of learning to develop a little more grit, I feel like our resilience has
which we, of course, we try to talk about that a lot when we're walking alongside parents. And I guess I'll throw this to both of you. If somebody feels like they've had trauma, what do we say to them? Because we still want to be loving.
Oh, yeah.
So what is that?
And real trauma exists, like, to be clear.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
This kind of goes to what you're saying, David. At one level, I think it's actually a really good thing that our young people can recognize maybe when they have unhealthy coping mechanisms, or that they're just struggling and not doing well.
Yeah.
And to admit that vulnerability,
So on one level, it's such a positive.
Yes.
Yeah, because I think, me being in a different generation, I think I grew up in a time when you don't talk about any of that. Like, you could have actually had big trauma, but you just keep that all inside. And so you're saying, like, it's better, at least we're talking about some of this.
I agree.
Yeah, and
I totally agree.
And then to your point, Jen, there's a great book, Kara Powell, and she talks about the 3 big questions that every young person wants to know, and they're all around identity, belonging, and purpose. And I think the depression and anxiety piece has been a way to plug my identity and name who I am to somebody else. I'm somebody who struggles with anxiety or depression. Like you said, it gives me a past, like something that I've experienced. And so I think it's a way for people to attach themselves to something meaningful in a way. And I think that might be what you're getting at in terms of, but sometimes we might overemphasize those things, and it may not actually be the root of what's going on deeper.
And or it can keep people stuck. Because one of the things that I would see is, I saw this more when I was in my adult training, but I remember in residency seeing patients who just were so stuck, and they were cycling through the inpatient unit. They essentially were professional patients. Like that was who they were. That was because that was where their identity landed. And that's one of the concerns I have about our current moment, is I want kids to share that vulnerability, talk about their struggles, admit when they're not coping well, and find the tools and the community to be able to right that ship. What I don't want to happen is for them to now decide, well, I'm carving this as my identity, and now I'm meeting with other people who have the same identity. So now we have identity and belonging,
and
because now we belong to the tribe of the
whatever that.
Yes. Yeah.
And for sure.
And if I'm going to get healing and become better, well,
I'm no longer part of that tribe.
I lose my belonging.
That's right.
Too.
That's right. I feel like we're in this perfect storm where it's developing a life of its own, and it's hard because you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is so much good in being able to have these conversations. And I just feel so much angst myself about like, oh, okay, but we've got to inject some of that grittiness back into where we are.
And we'll talk more about this hopefully before we finish, but that speaks into that piece on the parenting side that Kelly and I find ourselves often trying to encourage parents. Like, yes, we want you to acknowledge when your child's going through hard things, but we also want you to encourage them to fight through it, to get some grit, because they're going to need it.
Right.
They're going to need it down the road.
Yeah.
Just for a moment, because I was thinking about this as you were talking about that graph, kind of exponentially, but you chose this field. I'd love to know, like, what caused you to say, this is what I want to do.
What's wrong with you, Jen? Come on.
No, it's a good question. And I appreciate you asking, because it's nice to be able to reflect on that once in a while, because you get lost in the weeds sometimes and forget why you landed where you did. So I went to medical school planning to be a pediatrician. I've always loved children. I've always loved working with kids. So my plan was to be a pediatrician. Of course, my plan was also to be single and have 2 dogs. But then I met Josh at orientation. So we ended up getting married between our 2nd and 3rd year of medical school. And the way medical school is structured, the first 2 years is all kind of book classwork. And then the latter 2 years is when you're out doing clinical rotations. So that's when you're out in the field, as it were, like actually learning the practice of medicine. One of the required rotations you have to do is psychiatry, but I knew I wanted to do pediatrics. So I said, well, I want to do child psychiatry. So I set up my psychiatry rotation on a child and adolescent unit. While I was on the unit, I was talking to my instructor, the attending, and said, well, I'm going to be a pediatrician, but I really have a heart for these kids, and so maybe I'll be a counseling pediatrician. I just created my own thing that I was going to do. I'll take lots of electives. And he said, well, why don't you triple board, which is something where you do pediatrics, general psychiatry, and child psychiatry. And I was like, no way. That's 5 years long. That's really busy. I want to have babies at some point. And a peds residency is just 3 years. But I had that kind of in the back of my head all through my 3rd year. And then the beginning of my 4th year, I was supposed to go do a rotation. It was an away rotation, which meant Josh and I were going. We were staying in Cleveland because that's where he's from with his parents. We were going to live with them for a month. He had his rotation all squared away, so I had to find something to do there. I had a bioethics rotation lined up, which I was super excited about. And 3 weeks before, they said, oh, we can't do this. You have to pick something else. And so I said, okay, well, let's do this laboratory rotation part, right? Like, who wants to do lab? But whatever, I needed something. No, you can't do that either. That fell through. So then I said, okay, well, I'll do another child psych rotation because I'm going to be a counseling pediatrician. Whatever that means, nobody knows. And so they said, okay, and at this point we're like 2 weeks out and I'm a desperate med student. I just need to have something. Like, we know we're going, please. And then they said, well, you can only do child for 2 weeks because the fellows are just starting. So for the other 2 weeks, you'll have to do something else. So I did what's called consultation liaison psychiatry for the first 2 weeks. And at that point I was like, I don't care. I just need something. I was desperate. And the reason I go into any of this detail or why it matters is because as a med student, at least when I was in medical school, in my training where I was, nobody in their right mind did an elective in psychiatry unless you were going into psychiatry. Those were the only people who did it. Everybody else is doing electives and other things. And so I show up and they're like, oh, are you interested in psychiatry? And I was like, no, I'm doing peds. But I fell in love on the CL service. I've only had a few moments where I feel I have never heard the audible voice of God, but God has stopped me in my tracks a couple of times where it was a distinct, oh, Lord, like, I'm a planner. This is not the direction I had planned. Like, what are you doing right now? And that was one of those moments for me, was on that rotation when I just said, this is the kind of medicine I want to practice. This is why I went into this. It was a big changing time for me. By the end of that rotation, I was going into psychiatry, and all my other peds electives that I had set up, I went to them and they're like, oh, so you're going to do peds? I was like, no, I'm going into psychiatry. If I had gone into pediatrics, I could have, and I think I would have been a really good
Oh, you'd be
pediatrician.
great.
There are lots of really good pediatricians, excellent pediatricians out there. There are very few child and adolescent psychiatrists who
Yeah,
are
I mean, in
called
fact,
to it.
I've heard you talk about that. I wish we had more time because just how much of an anomaly you are is significant.
Yeah. So it really felt like a calling. And I guess
Yeah.
the capstone I'll put on that is when I applied for residency, you have to submit this essay, like applying for college. A personal statement is what it's called. And I actually referenced my faith in my personal statement and said I saw this as a calling, and I wish I had it. I'd have to go back and look and see what did I actually say about God calling me to this, because I used God's name in the personal statement, which felt pretty risky to me at the time. Yes, in the field of psychiatry to do that. But I felt really confident and encouraged from the Holy Spirit and by the Lord to do that, because it was going to help me self-select.
Yeah.
If there was a program where this was going to be a problem, that was not where I wanted to train. So I'm glad God gave me the courage or the boldness.
Yeah.
I don't feel like boldness has been a strong suit of mine, but that was one of those moments of boldness so that God could bring me where he wanted me to be.
Well, I'm glad you did too. And then Reese, I think about you, every time we do a mental health thing here at Lake City, you get pulled in for one reason or another. But I'd love to hear, like, how does that happen, or why do you think that happens?
I mean, I definitely I'm not the clinical expert like Jen is, but I think just because of where Generation Z is, they've been named the most anxious, lonely, depressed generation that's ever lived. And so in terms of that spike that you're talking about, that's what we're seeing in our youth ministry. And I mean, I already mentioned, but a lot of youth, when they start with their story, it's something around anxiety or depression. And so if pastors and youth leaders and parents are not equipped to lead our young people through this and point them to Jesus, then they'll go find something that fills that void that they're looking for, whether that be social media or, a teacher at school or whoever. Not that God can't use those things either, but we need godly parents and equipped pastors to be able to lead our young people through these really challenging things. And so for me, I think I get pulled in just because, all of our students seem to be walking this road. Through
well, and now I'm also remembering you wrote a book.
Yes, that is true.
Which is?
It's
Guilty.
That's right. Yeah, sometimes I forget about that. It's called Church Doesn't End with Z. So why Generation Z is leaving the church and how to reach them. And so Gen Z is that 1995 to 2010 age range. And so now we have all of the Gen Alpha kids, which is that 2011 to 2025, which my kids are, which is crazy to think about. All the statistics about Generation Z come out: lonely, anxious, depressed. Of course, COVID sort of exacerbated a lot of that because you have young people that are cooped up in the home. The social anxiety piece only grows to be stronger because you don't have outlets to practice. And so we see that a lot in our middle schoolers and high schoolers. They may be a little bit behind socially because they don't have those interactions. COVID took some of that away. But then I become more and more anxious. So going out to a youth group or something like that is even more daunting. And I get it in some extent because they had those interactions taken away because of COVID. The anxiety and depression is even more heightened. And so to answer your question, we see it all around us. And it's not just, of course, in our church or youth group, like it's all teenagers that are wrestling with it.
Well, and I mean, you can speak into that. Jen, what are you seeing in your practice? And, you're in that world. Obviously, we know some of what you're seeing because we see it on the news or in social media. But from your perspective, what are you seeing?
So we are seeing markedly increased rates in people because I was working in the emergency department for quite a time there. We saw the rates of kids coming in with primary behavioral health concerns were outpacing any other time. And that was back as early as 2013. 2012, 2013 was when it kind of started. And we were all talking amongst we all being other child psychiatrists working in those sorts of settings, talking amongst ourselves, being like, man, like this is just a really acute season. In child psychiatry, the crunch times are often October and March through May. Are when you see spikes of people coming in, kids coming in. It goes way down in the summer and it goes way down at the holidays. And we were seeing these rates come up and we're like, it feels like October, even though it's only January or whatever. And there are maybe lots of different reasons for that. But those trends have continued. It didn't become, okay, well, now we're going to get this nadir or this dip. It kind of went up and it never went back down to that low level. And then during COVID, that threw all our data for a loop because we didn't have the structure of school and of the school year and the school day. We're seeing a lot more acute suicidality than I remember seeing when I was in training. And I think one of the things I noticed was we were seeing it in much younger kids. It used to be you didn't see sort of the peaks in suicidality until you get more towards adolescence and even like mid to later adolescence. But we were seeing kids with single-digit ages coming into the ED with actual suicidality, which it used to be if kids came in and said they were suicidal, it was kind of like, okay, well, they parroted something they heard somewhere else. They're trying to get out of cleaning up their dishes. I mean, it was always one of those kind of like, okay, that's not really what's going on. It became that that's really what's going on. And so that was one of the big things I noticed clinically.
So again, sometimes looking through things through the lens of the gospel is helpful for framing it. You have what God intended, and then you have the fall. As we think in terms of like, where do we go from here? I certainly want to leave us with some hope, not false hope, but some hope. And we would say the gospel is that hope for sure. But from the professional perspective, pastoral perspective, where would you point people to, whether it be that young person or the parent of the young person? Where do we go from here?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different directions you could point to. One of the, I think, more obvious ones is probably allowing the church to really be the church. One of the things that we've talked about as a leadership team at church is how, because of social media, church online, nowadays you can go get a really good sermon anywhere. You can find it on TikTok, YouTube. You can go listen to really good worship on Spotify. But the one thing that you cannot get through social media is actually community. And so when we talk about the epidemic of loneliness, especially among young people, like the church has an answer for that. And we have an answer biblically for that. You don't have to make something up or pretend that, hey, we're really trying to fix this problem, so let's pretend like we have community. This is who God called us to be as the church, like to break bread with one another, to love one another, to carry one another's burdens. We get to invite people into the gospel reality of community. And so I think the church has something really beautiful to offer that honestly other institutions do not. And so it's a really cool cultural moment, I think, for the church. So to the young person wrestling with anxiety or depression, step into biblical community. And there's fears there, right? That I'll be rejected, or the social anxiety of being around a bunch of people I don't know. What I encourage young people to do is trust the promises of God even more than your feelings may be. Like our feelings are always real, in the sense of we feel them, but they don't always represent what's objectively true about our lives.
100%.
So I think separating those two is so hard, but so important as well.
So important. And they're not going to get that message at school or TikTok or social media, because the culture has become so postmodern, you know, where really feelings are what's true, and that's the driver. It's driving a lot of things in our current cultural moment.
Well, and I love Reese saying, like, they're real in the sense that they, yes,
the feelings
you absolutely
exist.
Feel that. And, and we're not belittling that or dismissing that.
That's right.
We're saying, and let's examine what's really going on and how can the gospel help you walk through that. I love what you're saying there, Reese. I think it's totally spot on. And I think the other thing we can do to help encourage our kids and our parents is looking to God and looking to Scripture, that we were not promised an easy road, right? Like Jesus did not have an easy road. We were promised that this life would be full of trials and tribulations. And if you think about the 23rd Psalm, David didn't say, you know, and help me just skip over the valley of the shadow of death. Like, bring your drone and carry me across. It's, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you are there with me. And I think if we can encourage parents to be there with their kids in the valley, and if we can encourage kids that they're not alone in the valley, and that the parents aren't alone in the valley, I think that goes a really long way. But it takes a lot of yielding to God and trusting
in what's at the other side of the valley, right? And it can be really scary when you're in that valley to not know what it's going to look like for that journey and how you get through.
But his promise is, I'll never leave you or forsake you.
Yes,
so
exactly.
It's not a promise that journey will be smooth, but I'll be with you on
and
the
if
journey.
we can submit to that truth of his promise that he will be there with us, instead of being so compelled by our feelings of fear that we're going to try to circumvent or avoid all the hard. And I think we're there. We've reached kind of a tipping point where we've seen some of the problems that are coming as a result of the things we've been focusing on.
So how about then, kind of to wrap up, talk to those people that are supporting those folks that find themselves like that, whether it be a parent, a grandparent, a friend, a teacher. You know, you have somebody in your life that is feeling those feelings. What do we say to them? What can we say to them?
That's good. It can be challenging because we're wanting to, we've named this already, but come with grace and truth, and both of those things. I think especially as parents, I don't have adolescent kids, but I have young kids. And so sometimes our kids can be naming reoccurring themes, and it can be frustrating even for us to say at a certain point, that's not true. What you're saying about yourself isn't true. And the feelings you're experiencing, I know you're feeling that, but that isn't true. And
that isn't who you are.
Yeah, right. And naming that is really important. But I think what I'm trying to say is always coming at it with grace and understanding and not parenting out of our frustration or anger in those situations. That's been a challenge for me with my 3-year-old.
With toddlers? Really?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. They start early. I think being able to talk through some of those really challenging things. Hey, what do you mean when you say you're feeling anxious? Like asking some of those clarifying questions. Jen named the fact that some of those things got redefined. And so what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
What helps you feel better in these situations? And then I also think it's really helpful to name, like, this is a journey. I think for young people, there's a permanence of emotions. Like, the way I'm feeling now will be the way I always will feeling. And we know that, like, God's walking us through the valley of the shadow of death. And so the way I'm feeling now will not always be the way that I'm feeling. And recalling God's promises to them. Hey, I know this is feeling really hard right now. And we're going to get through this together. And there's an end in sight to this thing too. It's not always going to be this way. And sometimes it's really hard to see past the power of the present moment because our feelings are so strong in the present.
As you were saying that, I was thinking about it from the parenting standpoint, because that's where, a lot of my life is lived is, walking alongside parents. And you've heard us say this. We teach parents to practice saying we love you and we're going to get through this. Because our kids do come to us sometimes with some really hard things. And if we can lead with that, because I'm like you, my natural reaction isn't always that. My natural reaction sometimes is, And so if we can lead with grace and love and say, look, we love you and we'll get through this, but we're here, with you. I would just say to the parents out there, what I want them to hear is that as a church family, like, we're here for you, we're with you. We have these mini courses that we're trying to set up, and we did one on mental health, and we'll redo it again, I'm sure, within this next year, and so be looking out for those. But I think it's a reminder that all of this is intertwined. Our own faith journey, our kids' faith journey, all these things that we do with them as we are parenting them, they all affect how they handle, the grit piece. It all affects how they handle those challenges when they end up being faced with them in life. And so doing the best we can as parents to grow in those areas and to be ready in those areas, I think just prepares our kids for what is coming, because it is coming. Like, all of us hit those hard things, those valleys. And if we can prepare them for that, then we're not being reactive, but we're being proactive. So again, we want to be here for our parents at LC3. I want our parents to know that. So Jen, you kind of get the last word about here we are. What would you say to our church family that find themselves either walking alongside somebody or in this valley themselves?
I guess a couple take-homes that I'm hoping people hear is I love what you were saying about, we know the valleys will come, right? So preparing them for the valley. I think that's so key. Preparing the kids to walk through and to navigate the valley instead of trying to prepare the valley for the kids, right? Instead of trying to pave the way and make the valley easier. And the thing is, none of us want to see our kids struggling or distressed.
Yeah.
The problem is they don't learn how to tolerate distress unless they're allowed to experience distress. And so that's another big thing that I have seen clinically is the capacity for distress tolerance is not what it used to be. And we've got to get back to it. And the only way to get back there is to allow the distress. So it means to validate the feeling, to acknowledge, oh my gosh, this stinks. This is so hard right now. And I'm here with you.
And we're going to get through this.
Yeah, we're going to get through this. But you don't say this part, but not because I'm going to fix it for you and I'm going to plow the way and make it all better. But you're not alone. This is really hard right now. I think that's a big take home. And then the other thing, I wouldn't be able to sit with myself if I left this conversation without saying, a lot of what we talk about when we talk about mental health is this learning to cope, not coping well, really struggling, but it's struggling with a lowercase s is sort of epidemic.
Yeah.
If you've got kids who are struggling with an uppercase S, don't be afraid to get professional help. Like there are interventions out there, and God has created us as humans to develop, and we have physicians for a reason, we have counselors for a reason. So don't be afraid to get that intervention when it's needed.
Yeah, thanks.
I think it's really important. And to know that just because you go for professional help doesn't mean you're going to necessarily get a medication, or you're not going to be in lifelong analysis where you're on a couch every day, 5 days a week. It might be just where you are in this season, but don't be afraid.
Thanks. That's really good.
Yeah.
So Reese, thanks for being here. And I love being able to do ministry with you. And in these spaces, I've so appreciated just the way you walk alongside our students in this, and so grateful for you. And then Jen, you know how much Kelly and I appreciate you, and we're so blessed as a church to have you. And we sometimes lean into you a little bit heavy, but thanks that you've always been so gracious with time, and thanks for being here. Because, I guess I'll leave everyone with this, folks, this isn't the end. We said it right up front, we're not solving all the problems, but hopefully we're opening up this conversation well enough that if you find yourself, as Jen said, in a place with a capital S, stress, that you would find some help. And if it needs to start with us, then so be it. One of the things I think we've been pretty good at as a pastoral team, as leaders, is we recognize what God wants us to deal with, and we recognize the things that God wants us to hand off to other people. But we love you, and we're going to get through this with you as well. So thanks for joining us, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you for joining us for connection, community, and relationship here on LC3 Family Talk. See you next time.